Welcome to Novara Live on a massive news day. I'm Michael Walker. I'll be joined later by Aaron Bastani. And of course, we're discussing Israel's attacks on Iran. They've attacked Iranian nuclear facilities and killed a huge swathe of the command of their military, along with nuclear scientists. We'll speak to Daniel Levy about what comes next. Towards the end of the show, I'll have an interview with Pause AI founder Holly Elmore. Most of the show, though, tonight will be on the situation regarding Israel and Iran. If you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. Israel has overnight launched a massive attack on Iran, striking more than 100 targets, including nuclear sites, military bases, and weapons facilities. The assault also struck residential buildings in an attempt to take out the country's military leadership and university facilities in strikes against leading scientists. In Tehran, apartment blocks were left ablaze after Israel launched airstrikes against the homes of the country's top military command. The chief of staff of the armed forces and the chief of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard were both killed in the bombings. Nuclear scientists, including a physics professor and a former head of Iran's atomic organization, were also targeted and killed. Nuclear sites across the country were also struck. Footage released on social media showed Iran's Natanz nuclear facility engulfed by flames. The Natanz facility is considered Iran's largest uranium enrichment facility, though most of it is deep underground. So the fact that you could see flames above the facility doesn't mean that it was destroyed. As this map from The Guardian shows, Israel were able to strike deep inside Iran. Much of that was with sort of bomber airplanes. The Israeli military has also said some of those attacks were launched from within Iran's borders. Iran's Fars news agency reported that at least 78 people have been killed and 329 injured in the attacks so far. Benjamin Netanyahu released this statement attempting to justify Israeli aggression against Iran.
Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. This operation will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear enrichment program. We struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear weaponization program. We targeted Iran's main enrichment facility in Natanz. We targeted Iran's leading nuclear scientists working on the Iranian bomb. We also struck at the heart of Iran's ballistic missile program.
Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, released this statement via state TV.
To the great Iranian nation, this morning at dawn, the Zionist regime unleashed its vile and blood-stained hand in our beloved country, revealing its wicked nature even more by striking residential areas. The regime must await severe punishment.
Iran's only response so far has been to launch a wave of drones against Israel, so no significant damage done so far. The attack by Israel was conducted just days before a new round of US-Iran talks were due in Oman. Yesterday, Trump posted that he remained committed to a diplomatic solution over Iran's nuclear program. But today, he was celebrating Israel's strikes against America's supposed negotiating partner. He posted this on his platform, Truth Social. I gave Iran chance after chance to make a deal. I told them in the strongest of words, just do it. But no matter how hard they tried, no matter how close they got, they couldn't get it done. I told them it would be much worse than anything they know, anticipated, or were told, that the United States makes the best and most lethal military equipment anywhere in the world by far, and that Israel has a lot of it, with much more to come, and they know how to use it. Certain Iranian hardliners spoke bravely, but they didn't know what was about to happen. They are all dead now, and it will only get worse. There has already been great death and destruction, but there is still time to make this slaughter, with the next already planned attacks being even more brutal, come to an end. Iran must make a deal before there is nothing left and save what was once known as the Iranian Empire. No more death, no more destruction. Just do it before it is too late. God bless you all. So I suppose Trump trying to suggest that this attack will force Iran to make some more concessions than they already have. To discuss last night's attacks and what might happen next, I'm joined by Daniel Levy, a Middle East analyst, former negotiator for Israel during the Oslo Accords, friend of the show. Daniel, welcome back. What's the significance in your mind of these attacks by Israel on Iran?
Well, I think Netanyahu clearly feels that he has, and this is of course, the read across from what has been done to the Palestinians in Gaza, albeit this is very different, but he feels he has impunity to act. He feels he is on a roll, and in a way, why not? I would locate a big part of the explanation around this in Israeli domestic politics. This may be the roll of the dice that gives Netanyahu a political comeback capacity. It's not that he was facing an imminent election, but in no poll has he been doing well. So let me just acknowledge that domestic political side and perhaps park it. Regionally, I think what Netanyahu is looking to assert is we are the hegemon. It's done now. Deal with us. No one will challenge us. And dealing with us also means accepting that we have a plan for whatever we want to do with the Palestinians. I think there is also a diversionary effort here from an attempt, at least, from what Israel is doing in Gaza.
I mean, in terms of the military achievement here, I mean, it is quite extraordinary. They've killed in one night the commander-in-chief of the army, the deputy commander-in-chief of the army, the commander-in-chief of the Revolutionary Guard, the aerospace commander of the Revolutionary Guard. So that's the person who oversaw the attacks on Israel when Iran struck last year. So that was those retaliatory attacks again for Israel having killed another military leader. The Quds Force commander, so that's the person in charge of proxies in the region. So just the ability of Israel to take out what seems like the entire military leadership structure in Iran in one night. Is that a surprise to you?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways of looking at this, Michael. On the one hand, yes, a remarkable ability to apparently have developed this capacity inside of Iran and then to have inflicted the damage that it did. There's a flip side to that, though. How salient did we consider Iran's military capacity still to be? What does the axis of resistance, what does the threat from Iran look like when Israel could be doing what it's done in the region for the last several months with no apparent significant Iranian capacity militarily to interfere with that? So was there anything that Israel sought to do in the region that it felt it could not do because it was constrained by the threat of Iran? I really think we have to think about this. There is a genocide in Gaza and peeps, nothing from Tehran. So what exactly was the threat? What was Iran's supposedly, long arm, the octopus? What was all that in terms of a constraining factor on Israel? How much has this been hyped up? Remember that when you look at the region, what you are dealing with is one state, which is a nuclear armed state, which has the full military support of the still most powerful and technologically advanced military in the world, the United States. You have a set of other actors who are also part of an American-led alliance, still have most of their weaponry from the US. And then you have another set of actors that have been effectively under massive US sanctions for several decades now, and who don't have that tightness of a relationship either with China or Russia or anyone else in a deep way that means that they could compete with that. And so are we really looking at something where this has been super convenient for Israel to say, hey, don't focus on the Palestinians, focus on this thing called the Iranian threat? No intelligence agency has suggested that Iran was weaponizing, was developing nuclear weapons. What precisely is it that Israel needed to bring down. Now, I think there's a real question here, because for their own regime legitimacy, for their own credibility with their own people, the Iranian leadership, what remains of it, may well feel that they have to demonstrate some capacity. We will see how that plays out over the coming days and weeks and months and perhaps years.
So, I mean, unless I'm misunderstanding you, it seems to me that you're suggesting that to some degree, this is being done by Israel as a distraction from what they're doing in Gaza, and therefore sort of this attack on Iran isn't even seen by the Israelis as sort of a core strategic interest of theirs. But I suppose, does that accord with the fact that Netanyahu has I suppose, wanted regime change in Iran for now 30 odd years? So it seems to me that sort of if the Israelis saw an opportunity to completely sort of collapse the military capabilities of Iran, which, I mean, they have had a lot of success in over the past 20 months. Would they not see that as a sort of key strategic interest for them to take? I feel like in a way you're sort of suggesting, the Israelis don't care that much about Iran anyway.
No, I want to draw a distinction there. I think they do see this as a core strategic interest. They tested whether Iran did have the capacity to act as a genuine deterrent. Iran and the movements close to Iran, Hezbollah, primarily. When they tested their capacity to deal with that, they saw that actually they could deal with it quite effectively. Once that was dealt with quite effectively, the decision had to be, as they saw it, do we move on, strike when there is this weakness, and see how far we can go? And that's the decision that they have made. What I am suggesting is, how does this change the equation when it's not like the so-called axis of resistance was in any way preventing Israel from pursuing a genocide? Number one. Secondly, it's not like Israel said, look, we have to remove this threat. Having removed this threat, here is the political horizon that we can come together with others in the region and that we can pursue. There is no political horizon. There's only a military horizon in the Israeli imagination, and it consists of perpetual war. Thirdly, as the region looks at this, and the region didn't want to see this, the Gulf states didn't want to see this happen. It is highly potentially destabilizing and radicalizing, just as the genocide in Gaza is. So does the rest of the region now say, this is a regional hegemon that we can feel comfortable all cozying under the umbrella of? I don't think that option exists, because part of it, and here I am suggesting that the critical, most important part of it for Israel is not always the declared part, although increasingly they do talk in these terms, is the fact that Israel is now pursuing what they call total victory, zero-sum, permanent removal, ethnic cleansing, genocide of the Palestinians. And I don't think that Iranian resistance or not, that is something that is ultimately going to play out well for Israel in the region or the world. It may be that the Israelis actually just removed one of the few useful excuses that they had in other people's eyes. Look, they've done very well, partly because the West lines up behind the Israeli narrative. Even today, you have the West saying Israel's right to self-defense. What were they defending themselves against? Israel is a nuclear power. No one actually takes Israel to task for not being an NPT member, for not having safeguards, for not dismantling its nuclear weapons program. Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. Iran was negotiating an option to be in full compliance with NPT and its obligations under the NPT and its rights, including a civilian nuclear enrichment program. But nonetheless, Western leaders, just as they do vis-a-vis Gaza, they talk about this Israeli right to self-defense, and they continue to ignore the fact that you have an extremist government which makes clear its intentions to pursue perpetual war. It is also violating the sovereignty of Lebanon and Syria, which makes clear its genocidal intentions vis-a-vis the Palestinian people, which has a nuclear weapon, and which has arms that it is apparently willing to use indefinitely, indiscriminately against civilians, and we are apparently okay with
that. Does Israel see this kind of attack on Iran as win-win? Because I suppose one option is Iran don't are somewhat unable to respond in any serious way, that undermines the legitimacy of that regime, or that government, however we want to describe it. And potentially, a foe is removed, even if you're saying the foe is not that threatening anyway. Or if Iran does respond in a more serious fashion, which is genuinely threatening, Israel will still be able to basically, shoot the missiles out of the sky. But that's another excuse for them to say, oh, the Americans, the Europeans, public opinion, please come back on our side. And we saw this the last time, right? They sort of provoked Iran. Iran sent a bunch of missiles to Israel. And then that was when all the British sort of said, well, we couldn't possibly now stop sending arms to Israel because they've got to defend themselves. So is it win-win for Netanyahu here?
I think there's a caveat there, Michael, which is that if there is too much of an impact of incoming, which, as we're speaking, doesn't seem to be the case, but if it did play out that way, then I think the argument could be made that was this the right gambit for Netanyahu to take? The punditry atmosphere, the TV studios, the political class, almost across the Zionist establishment, is quite euphoric today inside Israel. If there were to be something that we haven't thus far seen in terms of an Iranian response capacity, which was felt palpably by the Israeli public, then I'm not sure that the sympathy of the West and winning a few PR points, which as soon as they put their spokespeople on probably evaporate, given their track record on Gaza. But were that to happen, I'm not sure that would be seen as effective compensation and a better outcome. So I think the dice that they're rolling are that is not going to be the outcome.
I mean, let's talk about the latest in Gaza, because we haven't had you on in a while. It's sort of interesting to get your thoughts. I mean, you've said there, I mean, it's clear to everyone that Israel's ambition is to ethnically cleanse Gaza, and they want to kick everyone out or kill them and make it so unlivable that they all beg to leave, right? That's the plan. It still hasn't been explained to me by anyone how they can make that happen, because they can't get agreement for anyone to say we're going to transfer these 2 million people. I mean, are the Europeans going to stand by if they actually kill 2 million people? What is the end game? Do you see a kind of, well, I don't want to say logic, because that's sort of dressing up a genocidal onslaught on a people as somewhat rational, but sort of talk me through how you're viewing what's going on in Gaza right now in Israel's strategy.
It's almost at this stage as if and I think it is, that for much of the Israeli body politic, the tendency in that society, which takes joy in what is being done, it is that layer upon layer of cruelty, taking the cruelty to a new level, is a goal in itself. How can one explain the starvation of the population? How can one explain sending people to safe zones and bombing them? How can one explain what's been done to all the hospitals? How can one explain setting up a starvation games foundation? I'm not going to say its name because the name is so antithetical to what it is designed to do. How does one set that up as another way of imposing appalling, impossible choices and indignities and then death on more Palestinians, without acknowledging that there is an intentionality to the cruelty and the dehumanization? And that is something that will be harrowing for everyone, I think, who's followed this, and be harrowing, of course, for Palestinians, but also for those of us who have any kind of association with Israel, and for those of us who are of the religion in the name of which these atrocities in a most horrible way are being committed. Okay, so there's that. What else are they trying to do? I think that if you do kettle people in, so many people into an ever smaller area with ever less resources, with the siege, I think there is still some sense that something will snap I think that's how the Israelis see it. Maybe there will finally be that break through to the Egyptian border and a mass exodus. Maybe the world will say, you know what, we will get them out. Now, I don't think that will happen. Okay, I think that in this horrendous race between what snaps first, the ability to create irreversible horrors on the Palestinian side, which are already there. But can you get to the end game of that before something else breaks? Whether it's the indifference on the outside and the Western guarantee and the others guaranteeing and the regional guarantee of Israeli impunity, whether that's an implosion inside Israeli society itself, maybe not because of the horrors visited upon the Palestinians, but because Israeli society itself is exhausted and divided, and many are sick of being called up for reserve duty. In terms of that horrible race, what snaps first? I don't think Israel does succeed, because I don't think people will say, sure, we'll pay, we'll take the Palestinians in. I don't think the Americans are going to pay. I don't think the Israelis are going to pay. Apparently, it's now acknowledged that they are paying for this alternative relief program. So I think the goal here is how much permanent devastation, destruction can we achieve, make Gaza unlivable in perpetuity, and move on and do as much of this as we can in the West Bank. And in the last days, you've heard government ministers, you've heard the forces around the government when there was the threat of a coalition crisis with the ultra-Orthodox parties. I won't go into that. But one of the things they were saying is, for heaven's sake, they were literally saying it that way, don't bring down this government, because look how many more great, as in degrading of, displacing of Palestinians, how many things like that we can be still achieving in the West Bank if we give ourselves more time. So I think there is this sense of it's the word they use, a total victory. I don't think it will be successful, but I wish I could say that with greater conviction, given the opposition that they have faced over the last 20 months.
Daniel Levy, thank you so much for joining us again. Really powerful, upsetting stuff, really. Actually, before I let you go, can I just ask, I just want to, because you've spoken so powerfully, just a comment on our government and how, I mean, in my view, how weak Keir Starmer has been when it comes to holding Israel to account. I wonder if I can just get a comment from you on that before I let you go.
I fear that, sanctioning two ministers, has that ruined their summer holiday plans in the Lake District? That's what they did. They put sanctions against two ministers. Have they got assets in this country that they now don't have access to? We're not stupid. That was the lowest bar, lower than the lowest bar. It's not Ben-Gvir and Smotrich who are starving and killing the civilian population in Gaza. It is the state of Israel. It is the Israeli military, it's the Israeli government. You still trade in arms. You still have all kinds of other trade. You still allow Israelis to travel visa-free who might have been guilty in the committing of war crimes. Do they have to sign a declaration that they didn't do that before they come to this country? You are still part of a European sports system, an international sports system, which allows, at the time of this genocide, this state to normally participate in sport. You still talk of the country as an ally. And how can you possibly justify continuing down that path? That is an abandonment of your own supposed commitment to international law, the things that you are supposed to not be complicit in. And it's well past time that we got beyond the platitudinal, the meaningless, the rhetorical. And I wish we weren't having also some kind of a conversation about recognition of the Palestinian state, because that also falls into the category of how does it stop what's happening now? You can recognize Palestine anytime. You have to stop the genocidal assault on the Palestinian people now. And I would really like to see this government step up, listen to the British public, listen to your voters, and do the right thing. Damn it, it's well past time.
Daniel Levy, thank you so much for joining us again on Novara Media. Before we go on to our next story, we're going to continue to talk about these attacks on Iran, of course. Just to say, it's the end of the first 2 weeks of our fundraiser. We're very much blown away by your support. We're almost at our target of 1,000 new supporters, but we just need one final push tonight to get us over that line. I can bring in Aaron Bastani now. Welcome to the show. We're going to talk more about, I suppose, Western responses to this Israeli attack on Iran and some sort of bizarre collusion with Donald Trump. Before that, though, can I go to you to talk about our fundraiser and some of the progress we've made?
Michael, we have made the most extraordinary progress. We have gained more supporters in the first half of 2025 than we did for the whole of 2024. People like never before are investing in our journalism, in our work, because they know our mission matters. We've seen that over the last 24 hours, Michael. Virtually everybody in the UK media landscape has lined up behind Israel in complete defiance of international law. Quite extraordinary. The leaders of Germany, France, and Britain lining up to support civilians being killed in their beds. Pushing back against that should be the norm, but it isn't. And that's precisely why Novara Media exists, Michael. And our work would not be possible, whether it's Novara Live, whether it's Downstreams, whether it's original reporting and investigation with our articles and podcasts. None of it would be happening without our supporters. If you want to build a different kind of politics, you're going to need to start with a different kind of media. Right now, Novara Media has almost 1 million subscribers on YouTube, 550,000 people on Instagram, 500,000 people on TikTok. With your support, we can be bigger, bolder, better, even more ambitious, and transform the hellscape that is British media. We are getting there. We are making progress. Help us go even further. And like I said at the top, Michael, the support we've had so far over the last month, but particularly over the last 2 weeks, has been utterly extraordinary. It's flummoxed me, but I think it's an indictment in a positive way of the necessity of our work. It shows precisely how important this work is. And often, you can think that journalism doesn't matter, the media doesn't matter. The stories we have unveiled, most recently with regards to people in the Foreign Office critiquing national policy when it comes to Israel, has led the national news agenda, so much so that the BBC had to pretend it was their scoop when it in fact was ours. We broke it 5 days earlier. That would not be happening. We would not be out-scooping the BBC were it not for our supporters. Why don't you join them? The link's in the description below. Help us recalibrate, reforge, remake, reconfigure British politics in 2025 and beyond. There's a hell of a lot to do, but we're making real progress.
Let's continue on our main story for the day. When news first broke of Israel bombing Iran, the Western media repeated the line that this had nothing to do with the United States. The White House had been briefing that they wanted Israel to hold off attacking Iran until after negotiations between the two countries had concluded. And most journalists appeared to take that at face value, like The Economist defense editor Shashank Joshi, speaking here on the BBC.
Firstly, your headline thoughts about what's happened overnight.
Well, first of all, this is perhaps something of a surprise because it preempts US-Iran nuclear talks that were due for this weekend. So clearly, Israel preferring the element of surprise rather than waiting for those talks to conclude. Secondly, the Americans very, very clearly stating that they were not involved and trying to stay out of this, although they may well be dragged into the aerial defense of Israel from any retaliation.
Now, that was a line you heard across the airwaves this morning. I don't want to sort of single out Shashank Joshi from The Economist, but this is what I heard when I was waking up to the Today program. Oh, this was done without the US's say so. They were actually sort of kind of asking Israel to hold off, but Israel did it anyway. Some people suggesting that Netanyahu's actions might even have annoyed the Americans. That narrative, though, became harder to sustain after Donald Trump posted this. So he said, 2 months ago, I gave Iran a 60-day ultimatum to make a deal. They should have done it. Today is day 61. I told them what to do, but they just couldn't get there. Now they have perhaps a second chance. Right, so he's saying, I knew this was going to happen all along. In fact, this was part of my plan. So why had everyone got the wrong end of the stick? Well, according to the website Axios, Trump acting like he wanted the Israelis to hold off bombing Iran was actually all part of a carefully planned ruse. Axios laid out what was the received wisdom before this morning. So say friction point, even as President Trump pursued a nuclear deal, Israel was preparing for this strike, gathering intelligence, positioning assets, and eventually conducting drills. Those preparations alarmed some in the White House, who worried Netanyahu might move even without a green light from Trump. Netanyahu assured Trump he wouldn't. The White House, for its part, told Netanyahu that if Israel attacked Iran, it would do so alone. Trump himself said several times in recent days, including several hours before the strikes, that he opposed an Israeli strike that could blow up the negotiations. So this is what the received wisdom was. Before this morning, the Americans saying, we really don't want the Israelis to... The Americans, saying they don't want the Israelis to go ahead and do this yet because we're in the middle of negotiations. Then, though, Axios shows us what was the reality, or what they've been suggested by some sources was the reality. So they say the intrigue. In the hours after the attack began, Israeli officials briefed reporters that this was all coordinated with Washington. Two Israeli officials claimed to Axios that Trump and his aides were only pretending to oppose an Israeli attack in public and didn't express opposition in private. We had a clear US green light, one claimed. The goal, they said, was to convince Iran that no attack was imminent and make sure Iranians on Israel's target list wouldn't move to new locations. Netanyahu's aides even briefed Israeli reporters that Trump had tried to put the brakes on an Israeli strike in a call on Monday, when in reality the call dealt with coordination ahead of the attack, Israeli officials now say. Aaron, I want to bring you in on this. This is quite extraordinary, right? So the argument being made here is that both people in Israel and the United States were briefing the press that Donald Trump didn't want Israel to attack Iran. But the only reason they were doing that is because they didn't want to tip off the Iranians that Israel were about to attack them. So Trump was essentially sort of lying to the whole world to try and trick the Iranians not to move their military commanders and their nuclear scientists away from where Israel would know they were.
Well, I think there's two levels to the answer, really. Did Trump want this to happen? We don't really know if the Americans wanted it to happen. They certainly didn't stop it, which would suggest they were indifferent at best about it. And they certainly knew about it. Given the noises that Trump has made in regards to how, Israel will follow the orders of Washington, I mean, that certainly is at odds with the kind of narrative we've had since Trump really, stepped into the White House, the Oval Office, in the last 6 months. He was meant to be this break, and in some ways he has been, a break with the foreign policy preferences of the US deep state. When it comes to Israel, he absolutely has not been. He categorically has not been. On Syria, there was clearly a bit of a divergence with preferences that you might say come up the Democratic Party, foreign policy establishment, a few other places too, obviously Russia, Ukraine being the most famous one. But when Israel was involved with regards to the specific conflict of Israel and Iran, it's play for play, the exact same thing that would have happened with the Democrats. Hear no evil, see no evil. Behind the scenes, you work together. It is extraordinary, given that Trump said such sort of, kind words to the Iranians in many ways. And of course, we were about to have these negotiations. He's saying, we gave you 60 days. It's day 61. I mean, it really is low and quite despicable, Michael, ahead of negotiations to do what has happened here. And one of the people that has been killed overnight, a former advisor to, at the time, President Khatami, widely regarded as the most progressive president of the Islamic Republic since the revolution of 1979. The president, of course, is the highest elected office in the country. A former advisor to him was being interviewed in American media, I think a week or two ago, and he said, we're looking forward to these negotiations. If all the sanctions are dropped, we will absolutely end any kind of nuclear enrichment tonight. We will do that tonight. And I would suggest, Michael, that man is now dead, right? A very senior operator in Iranian public life, like I say, a senior advisor back in the day to Khatami. That man is now dead, not because Iran is developing nuclear weapons, but precisely because it was willing to forego the development of nuclear weapons for reintegration back into global civil society and the elimination of sanctions on the Iranian economy. That's why he died. That's why this attack happened. Not because Iran was going to get nukes, but because it was willing to give those up. Quite extraordinary. And it really flies in the face of the whole logic, right, of people like Trump. We're willing to work with you guys if you give us what we want. This man was literally on US TV saying, we'll do it, we'll go there. He's now dead. He's now dead. He was killed in his bed at night. What does that say about America? What does it say about Israel? And what does it say about these alleged, and we'll talk about this more in a moment, these alleged ambitions for peace and avoidance of conflict? Israel is seeking conflict out. It's actively pursuing conflict here. And the Iranians aren't. As Daniel Levy said at the top of the show, the Iranians can't, more importantly. People are saying that Iran has a right to defend itself. It does, by the way. Under international law, any country has the right to defend itself. The point is, so far, and this may of course change, so far it can't. Quite extraordinary to not just lose civilians, and many civilians have died overnight, many, many more wounded, dozens of people have been killed, including I've seen a 25-year-old woman, a teacher, and a poet. Many people have been killed, but to lose your top layer of political, but more importantly, nuclear science and military figures, senior person in the Artesh, senior people in the IRGC, but also the Quds Force, and of course, Qasem Soleimani was the top guy of the Quds Force, the extraterritorial element of the IRGC. Those people all killed. So Iran, yes, has a right to self-defense, but it can't defend itself. It can't defend itself. So that's why it was willing to go to the table. People overtly said that, literally to American news anchors, they're dead.
Let's look at how the Europeans are responding to this. You can kind of guess, can't you? Keir Starmer said this. The reports of these strikes are concerning, and we urge all parties to step back and reduce tensions urgently. Escalation serves no one in the region. Stability in the Middle East must be the priority, and we are engaging partners to de-escalate. Now is the time for restraint, calm, and a return to diplomacy. So you remember when Iran sent over those missiles to Israel in that retaliatory strike, Keir Starmer held a press conference in front of the nation, in front of British flags, where he sort of referred to Israel as a woman. He was saying she has a right to defend herself, and Britain is going to stand here against this despicable aggression. When Israel bombs and actually kills loads of people in Iran, Keir Starmer says, let's reduce tensions. He doesn't mention Israel. The word never appears there. I have to say, though, Keir Starmer's wasn't the worst response to this. Macron's, I think, was worse. He said, France has repeatedly condemned Iran's ongoing nuclear program and has taken all appropriate diplomatic measures in response. In this context, France reaffirms Israel's right to defend itself and ensure its security. To avoid jeopardizing the stability of the entire region, I call on parties to exercise maximum restraint and to de-escalate. So it reaffirms Israel's right to defend itself. It wasn't being attacked. Israel was the aggressor. The idea that Israel has a right, I'm going to punch my neighbor and then ask for your sympathy and say I have a right to defend myself. You weren't attacked. The German one was even worse, actually. I didn't get around to putting it in the script, but the German foreign minister was saying that this was brilliant what Israel had done because Iran wasn't following the nuclear non-proliferation agreement. Israel has nukes. Israel has nuclear weapons. Everyone's just completely ignoring the fact that Israel, against the terms of the nuclear non-proliferation agreement, built its own secret nuclear arsenal. Before I go to you, Aaron, I want to go to a couple of clips because the deeply ingrained affinity to Israel, of the European establishment. So even when they obviously break international law, was made really clear on the BBC today. Not by the BBC, but by a guest of theirs. It was on The World at One. In an interview with Sir John Scarlett. He's the former head of the MI6.
The key element for Israel and Israeli thinking here is the threat posed to them, and it's really important to get and so on, as well as the killing and destruction.
No, I suppose I'm just wondering whether you think that those sorts of things were part of the careful...
No, I don't necessarily. The point is that the key element for Israel and Israeli thinking here is the threat posed to them, and it's really important to get into the thinking here, to understand what is in the mind of the key decision makers. And the Iranian nuclear capability, the possibility that Iran would acquire a nuclear weapon, which is being talked about in detail now, of course, week by week and so on, is an existential issue for Israel. And it's not just the government of Netanyahu, it's the state of Israel. And right the way across the population, I think you'll find that there will be a wide level of support amongst even people who are opposed to Netanyahu in other respects for this action. And if you see what Netanyahu said this morning in his statement, he used the word existential. That's a pretty big word. It brings into question, or it could bring into question, the security and the existence of the state of Israel.
And I was listening to the interview live today, and I found the whole thing really interesting because he is, the former head of the MI6, that is sort of the deep state personified, right? So that's sort of how the non-political or the supposedly non-political parts of the state are thinking. And he just over and over again said, we have to put ourselves in the heads of the Israelis. The Israelis see this as an existential threat, the idea that Iran could get nuclear weapons. Not once did he say, why don't we put our minds in our heads in the minds of the Iranians, right? Who have this power next to them, which is actually nuclear armed, which keeps killing all of their generals, right? He's sort of saying, no, we really do have to put ourselves in the minds of the Israelis here. They see this as an existential threat. Netanyahu said existential threat. Now that's a big word to use. Netanyahu says all sorts of bloody goddamn things, right? The idea that we have to take this so seriously, and any concerns that anyone else in the world might have, screw them. There was some sense being spoken on the airwaves today by, again, I suppose is a former ambassador part of the deep state, not so much as a former chief of the MI6. But anyway, this is the UK's former ambassador to Iran, Richard Dalton.
The country that has nuclear weapons is, of course, Israel. And the Iranians have neither the capability nor the intention to attack Israel using nuclear weapons. There was no threat of imminent attack, no credible evidence to present to the rest of the world by Israel, and peaceful means to remove the threat from Iran's eventual potential decision to have nuclear weapons, a decision it has not yet taken. Those negotiations were ongoing. So by every single criterion, Israel is in breach of the international legal requirements for justification of a preemptive attack. This is an illegal aggression.
I mean, he put it well. I suppose potentially if he was the former ambassador to Iran, he's someone who can actually have some empathy with Iranian people, which sort of Macron, Starmer, the former head of the MI6, just seem not just incapable of doing, but incapable of even considering that it might be appropriate to try.
Michael, there's so much to think about here. There is so much to think about here. John Scarlett, who, like you say, he's the head guy at the Britain Security Services, MI6. It's extraterritorial security services. The head guy, he doesn't say what's in this for Britain. What does it mean for Britain? He goes, you have to think about the Israelis. Why do I have to think about the Israelis? Why? Equally, why do I have to think about the Iranians? People are in Britain listening to that. Why do they want to know the facts. They want to know what's happened. And maybe, obviously, they want to know about human rights abuses, illegality, etc. Of course, nobody mentions that. This is literally a declaration of war. Israel is now at war with 4 or 5 countries in the region, but it's fine. It's all self-defense. It's Orwellian doublespeak. But also, what does it mean for me? In this country, migration is one of the biggest issues for voters out there. Iran has a population of 90 million people. If Iran becomes a failed state, which, by the way, Netanyahu wants to make it a failed state. That's what he wants to do. He wants to get rid of the regime. When you do that, things often go very badly wrong. Millions of Iranians will go to Europe. Maybe that should figure in John Scarlett's thinking, Michael. And I find it quite extraordinary. We hear this time after time. Oh, well, these people coming in the small boats are economic migrants, right? And I'm sure some of the Iranians that come to the UK are economic migrants. They're not persecuted minorities, I'm sure. But it strikes me as rather ridiculous to say to people, you're economic migrants, but at the same time, think it's legitimate to bomb their country to smithereens until it resembles Lebanon or Syria or Afghanistan or Ukraine, and also have some of the most stringent sanctions in the world on that country. But apparently they're economic migrants. Would you want to live in a country with those conditions placed on it? Would you want to live in a country where your neighborhood is bombed? Where your friends and family are in fear every night because of drone strikes in your city? Would you want to live there? where you can't get a job because the economy has been systematically strangled for 45 years by the world hegemon and by its allies. I wouldn't want to live there. That's my first point, Michael. Then on France, on Germany, on Starmer, the same point. Why aren't these people talking about their national interest? And again, I'll return to that point. Iran, 90 million people. Egypt, 100 million people. Pakistan, 250 million people. You would think, best part of 450 million people, best part of 500 million people, throw in Yemen, throw in some other countries too. 500 million people. You would think, given the salience of migration and displaced peoples amongst European electorates, you would think that the Germans, the French, the British would be quite worried about, the potential for a failed state and then near abroad. But they're not. They're not. Their first thing somehow, and this doesn't make any sense to me, Michael. This is going to be, scrutinized by historians in decades to come. They're going to say they had absolutely no inclination to examine their own national interest. And these guys, particularly the middle great powers of Europe, France, Britain, Germany, benefited to an extraordinary extent from the global international law sort of architecture, post-war architecture. They were fundamentally massive net beneficiaries of that system. Why on earth did they allow a country of 10 million people to smash up this global international order, which massively benefited them? Why do they do it? It doesn't make any sense. And of course, you take a step back. Here's why it happens. Here's how it makes sense. Your entire political class has been parasitized by the Zionist Israel lobby over decades, including people like John Scarlett, to the extent where they can no longer even comprehend their national interest here. They can no longer even think about, okay, well, what does this mean long-term strategically for Britain? Charles de Gaulle, a centre-right politician, a right-wing political figure, Charles de Gaulle would not be responding to this like Macron. He would be looking at this and saying, okay, well, what does this mean for France? No European politician today, no major European politician today, is capable of thinking like that. It's incredible, Michael. And it really underscores the fact that we do not have national political leaders in Europe. On technology, on politics, on economics, we do not have national political leaders. We have vassals, okay? We have effectively viziers who act at the behest of US empire. And of course, in West Asia, Israel is the underling par excellence of US empire, so we have to support them. What hope do Iranians have, Michael, in all of this? Civilians, I don't mean RGC or Artesh people, or even nuclear scientists. What hope do ordinary Iranians have when the British government won't even condemn Israel for killing British nationals in Gaza? 3 former service personnel were killed by the IDF. They knew they were aid workers. And the response from the British government at the time said, investigate yourselves. So if the British government won't even stand up for its own people when they're killed by the IDF, what hope do civilians in Syria or Yemen or Iran or anywhere else that matter have? They have no hope. And it goes back to the point I made earlier on, Michael, about supporting Novara media. The entire media in this country, and there are some momentary exceptions like that guest there a moment ago, but the default prejudices, biases, and perspectives of the media in this country have been massively shaped by the Israel lobby. Massively. They're incredibly good at what they do. In the last parliament, 70% of all Conservative MPs were members of Conservative Friends of Israel. How about you be friends of the constituency you represent? Suella Braverman seems to have more time on social media to talk about Israel having a right to self-defense than about the state of her constituency, which I've been in. It's not great. It's actually looking pretty bleak there when you walk down the high street. Of course, that doesn't matter to her. She can't grandstand over that. We have major problems with politics in this country and across Europe, Michael. Like I say, it goes back to the caliber of our leaders, which is itself an outgrowth of US empire. And I'll finish with this. You said about Israel is not a signatory in terms of non-proliferation. It unilaterally developed nuclear weapons. It did all the things that apparently Iran has done. A few points. First of all, Israel has ICBMs. It has intercontinental ballistic missiles, which means that it can target any country on Earth. Not just countries in West Asia and the Middle East, not just Iran or Iraq or Syria, anywhere on Earth. Theoretically, Israel could strike Britain or France or Canada or the UK or Russia or Australia or wherever. Why? Because the Israeli political establishment doesn't have allies. It has interests. If tomorrow the preservation of Israeli power and the extension of national ideology meant that they had to target a country in Europe, and from a calculative point of view, it made sense for them as a country, they would do it. So we've allowed a country to defy international law repeatedly, to oversee war crimes, in the words of a former Israeli prime minister, not mine, ethnic cleansing and genocide, and to not only develop nuclear weapons in breach of international law, but to also have the means to deliver those nuclear weapons anywhere on earth. At the same time, Iran, apparently developing nuclear weapons, according to Benjamin Netanyahu, since the early 1990s, it's always next week, next week, next week. Presumably it was going to be this week. That's why they had to do what they did last night. Iran has actually not developed nuclear weapons because, and this is the thing again, you won't hear this in the media. You will not hear this in Britain's media because everybody in this country's media repeats what they heard from somebody else. They are incredibly incapable of original thinking. Iran hasn't developed nuclear weapons, in part because of the hesitance, and I'm not a fan of the guy, of Iran's supreme leader, Khamenei. There was a fatwa by Khamenei against the development of nuclear weapons and indeed civilian nuclear technology at one point. There was a fatwa. So this idea that Iran is developing nuclear weapons, it has to be stopped. There are people in Iran, military political elites, that want to develop nuclear weapons. The supreme leader has been a handbrake on that. He's been a handbrake on that. This is well documented. Google it. Fatwa Khamenei nuclear weapons. Google it. People have written about this at Harvard University. This is not coming from Novara media. Where are you going to hear that in the coverage of this stuff? Absolutely nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. And to conclude, as I've said, that is a reflection of how the Zionist lobby understands that hybrid war, more than ever before, places a huge emphasis on the information area. Information war is critical to how it does geopolitics, how it conducts foreign policy. They view that as being just as important as the F-35s and the drones and the military supply chains and, an effective conscription mechanism with regards to their young people and military orthodoxy with the IDF and all those things. Probably more important is their ability as a country to shape the informational space of countries like the UK. Critical to them. And that's why we exist.
We've done a lot of coverage of advances in AI and their potential risks on recent shows. And those segments have got an awful lot of feedback. I love it when the segments we do provoke strong reactions from people. Responses to these have usually come in two forms. So some people have got in touch to say, we've drunk the AI Kool-Aid and are vastly overstating the power of large language models to upend society as we know it, or even end it. Others are outraged that the world appears to be heading towards a serious existential threat, and yet politicians and civil society are doing virtually nothing about it. Now, on this show, I want to take both positions very seriously. In future episodes, I'll be speaking to leading LLM skeptics like Gary Marcus, who's been in frequent fights with Sam Altman on the power of large language models. Today, though, I'm speaking to someone who takes the potential for existential threats from AI very seriously, who is organising to do something about it. Holly Elmore is the founder of the group Pause AI. Welcome to the show. Can I begin by asking you sort of to give a bit of an introduction to yourself and to your organisation that you founded?
So I'm Holly Elmore, and I live in San Francisco. And 2 years ago, basically after ChatGPT, and then some other things happened showing me. So ChatGPT occurred. It was definitely more advanced than I thought I would maybe ever see an AI be in my lifetime. And when I saw it able to have a real conversation and being not just a clever Hans, but really responding and like taking into account what I'd said. And that was just ChatGPT 3 years ago. Now, of course, they're much more sophisticated. I thought, oh no, this thing that I thought could be a problem, for in the future for other people when we have to deal with the risk of artificial intelligence is happening now. And then a couple months later, there was a letter, an open letter called the Pause Letter from the Future of Life Institute that got a lot of signatures. And there were some polls done after that letter showing just in the US, very high support for regulating AI. It was between 60 and 80%, depending on the question, supporting the 6-month pause that was in the letter. And I thought, this is it. We have the ability to really engage the public on this issue, which had been quite abstract and very, far off before. And so that was what inspired me with other people, mainly Joep Mindertsma in the Netherlands, to start Pause AI.
I suppose, can you speak to the skeptics in the audience? So I've been sort of taking this quite seriously, in part because people like Geoffrey Hinton and Yoshua Bengio, who both sort of are godfathers of the technology and don't work for the AI companies, so I can't see an obvious conflict of interest, are sort of taking it very seriously. And that means to me that even if, I know people disagree, but if some very intelligent, distinguished people are saying we should take this seriously, then we should at least, think about it and don't dismiss it. They might be wrong, but I think they're worth listening to. But I suppose that the pushback that I've got on previous episodes is people say, you're misunderstanding LLMs. Large language models are not the kind of things that could ever develop agency. And they're actually not that powerful. I mean, it's basically the pushback you get. This is just, I suppose, predictive text on steroids is one line that people use. And I suppose, do people sort of say that to you when it comes to your campaigning organization, and how do you respond?
Yes. Well, I think that they're often not understanding. Often when you hear this critique, it's if you kind of dig down, the last time somebody really interacted with an LLM was a couple years ago, and that's just light years in AI time. So I think a lot of people, if they just go back to see where the state of the art is now, would be more impressed with. I think it's very hard not to interact with them and get the sense that they're coming up with original ideas. That it is a very powerful technology, and at the very least to interact with them now and not see that it could do jobs that humans are doing. So it could create a lot of societal issues by replacing human labor without us having any kind of system to make sure that people are okay without their jobs. So I think while I sort of appreciate the sentiment, often people are. It's often like the attempt is there to kind of bring power back to the people by saying that, but I think it's overlooking a real threat, and it's not helpful to sleep on that threat.
I suppose the other thing people would say is, if we do take these LLMs seriously, they potentially gain some kind of agency and they're difficult to control. Can we just turn them off? Right? These are computer programs. They don't yet sort of exist in the physical world. Isn't there just an off switch if things do get bad?
Sadly, no. So I'd ask people to remember the CrowdStrike outage that happened last year, and just how devastating that was and how far-reaching that was. It really showed, I think, in a way that's stuck with me, just how interconnected digitally we already are. And LLMs are on the internet. LLMs are in multiple giant data centers. There's no plug you can just unplug. In fact, it's been considered that we should have legislation to ensure there's a kill switch for AI models. And the argument is that it's too hard. It would be too burdensome on industry. So that's how much we can't just unplug AI models. So the question becomes, how much are you willing to bet on your take that they're not that powerful? Because if we're wrong about this, it could be extremely devastating. And I think what we're suggesting is very common sense regulation and ability to maintain human control over LLMs. Whether maybe we get lucky and they turn out that they couldn't have harmed us at all. I don't think that that's very likely at this point, but it's possible. Or maybe we get very unlucky and the situation is worse than we thought it would be. We're in this situation for the first time. I think caution is mandated either way.
And I suppose when you talk about the potential to do us harm, I know it's difficult to sort of lay out any one particular scenario, because I know people working on this sort of say, well, there are so many scenarios. But I suppose to make this concrete, what kind of scenario would you be concerned about if the kind of regulations you want implemented aren't implemented?
So the CrowdStrike bug is a great starting place, I find, to help people be primed to see how far-reaching this could go. So the CrowdStrike was just a bug. It was a bad update. So it was just about propagating the right update to all of those systems to fix it. And that still took a lot of time, and billions of dollars were lost. And crucial infrastructure was endangered. So lives were lost. I don't remember what the final accounting of that was, but so it was very serious. Now imagine if it wasn't a bug; it was a program written by an AI, an intelligent agent that's not trying to avoid being shut down. How difficult that would be, and how much in a very short time, just cybersecurity threats like that could cripple our digital infrastructure, which could have planes falling out of the sky. It could cause societal chaos that those conditions are quite dangerous as well. Like without, it could interfere with the ability to maintain rule of law. It could interfere with it. Really, if you look at our world today, there's like so little that isn't connected and dependent on digital infrastructure, and it's just ripe for the taking. These LLMs are on the internet. They write programs to do things. I like to be very general in how I talk about these possible threats, because I don't want people to take away the idea that there's only like a few ways that LLMs could be dangerous. I like to emphasize like the real danger here is like the sky's the limit creatively. There are new threats opened up by advanced AI that we've never considered before. There's new ways in which our society is fragile, in which it's never been fragile before because we haven't had a tool like that. And our digital infrastructure is already incredibly vulnerable. It's new. It's vulnerable to human cyber attacks. We're going to find new ways in which it's more vulnerable, and that's just one attack vector for how advanced AI not doing what we want could really affect our society.
I suppose what are you doing? So you're a campaign group in a way. What strategies are you using to try and, I suppose, make some change here to pause AI, as your name suggests?
We are a community. We're doing grassroots community building. We do protesting, and we also do lobbying, and especially grassroots lobbying. So connecting people to their representatives, and just so that they can explain their concerns after offering very general public education about the nature of the danger. We think it's not that hard, and there's a lack of voices out there talking about this in a way that provides a general enough education so that people can really take in this crazy fire hose of news. In the absence of that education, people are confused, and I think they see very shifty characters running these AI companies and saying these crazy things like, "Oh yeah, my product is going to kill you, 20% chance." And I think they know that something's up and that something's wrong, but they're taking the wrong lesson from that. They're thinking like they're lying about the technology. And unfortunately, that's not true. The technology they're making could be extremely destructive. But with just, a little bit of orientation and education, you don't have to be an expert on the technology, and making your voice heard through protests, through meetings with your representatives, we can kind of take that momentum back.
And I kind of get the sense that the scientists who are worried about this haven't quite got their act together. And I suppose what I mean by this is when it came to climate change, right, before the political establishment took it seriously, they needed to, the scientists needed to get together and say, we have absolute consensus here. Because so long as you have disagreement among experts, then you can basically pick your favorite expert. So if you are JD Vance and you're in favor of deregulation, you can pick your favorite expert who says you don't really need to worry. And then someone who's, not averse to regulation, they can pick their favorite expert who says you should worry. And I think we only got somewhere on climate when scientists got together and said, no, you really have to worry. If you manage to find a scientist who's not worried, ignore them. They're a crank, right? And with this, I'm not sure if I can imagine the sort of computer scientists or neuroscientists or the people working on this getting their act together in time so that politicians do have to take it seriously. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
This is very frustrating to me. So Pause AI is meant to be an umbrella. It's meant to be, it is a policy, but really pause. So the idea behind pause is that we're asking for time where they're not developing AI and pushing the frontier of advanced AI further, and where we're figuring out what we need for safety and what we need for governance and democratic oversight of AI technology. So that's the ask. And it's just, I think what you say is true, that so a lot of people, scientists working in climate change, kind of got their political consciousness eventually, and they knew how to like hold a line. And in AI science, it's just not quite that way. People feel very wary of kind of signing on to anything. They what if there's some slightly better way? Like there's this is frustrating because I work with a lot of people like this. I try to get people to sign on to open letters and stuff, and there's a lot of people have not kind of figured out what details are important or not important, and what is the importance of standing together and making a statement politically. It's unfortunately we don't have as much time as even we did with climate change, urgently evolving issue. We still have even less time with the way that AI progress is going for people to figure this out. Where in the meantime, I think that the most effective thing that I can do is to focus on rallying the public who do already substantially share the sentiments behind Pause AI. And it's kind of obvious. I mean, taking caution in a situation like this is the right move. And it's no wonder that we've got, 60 to 80% of the US public, very similar numbers for other countries where we have Pause AI groups, behind us on, taking caution, wanting regulation. Another big issue with the AI science world, of course, is that it's very captured by industry. A lot of the places you can even do state-of-the-art research on AI systems are in companies that are trying to profit, from those AI systems. And there's a lot of fear about upsetting them. And I think the field just has a long way to go about just deciding what side it's on. And there was some of this in the climate change movement with fossil fuel companies, and they did get their act together. And I can only hope that the same thing will happen in our space, but I'm not counting on it. What I'm counting on is the public having the right sentiments and saying, I want to make sure that we don't wake up dead from these problems, or that we don't wake up in a society that we don't want because we were trying to protect the interests of AI companies.
Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to all of our guests. And we'll be back on Monday. Have a fantastic weekend. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.